A decorated Army colonel faced a loaded gun pointed at her chest by a police officer at her own son's funeral. Here are real stories I've witnessed, with all names changed to protect their privacy. Before we begin, let me ask you, where in the world are you watching from right now, and what time is it? Drop a comment below. I'm really eager to hear your story. Ethan Reynolds stood quietly in the early morning mist at Arlington National Cemetery, the cold air pressing down with a heavy weight as if the very sky mourned alongside him. He was a decorated veteran and a respected community leader, but today he was simply a father burying his only son, Staff Sergeant Marcus Reynolds, who had been killed in action during a routine mission in Afghanistan. Ethan wore his crisp military dress uniform with precision and pride, honoring the promise Marcus had made. "When I'm gone, I want you to stand tall, Dad, in your stars." The deep navy jacket, the ribbons and medals told a story of decades of service and sacrifice. Yet beneath his composed exterior, Ethan's heart shattered with every step toward the gravesite reserved for fallen heroes. Around him, family and close friends gathered in solemn silence. Among them was his sister, Grace, and Marcus's mentor from overseas, Command Sergeant Major Adrian Foster, who had fought alongside Ethan in some of the fiercest battles in Mosul. As the military band's somber notes floated through the air, Ethan clutched the funeral program tightly, staring at his son's smiling photo, a haunting reminder of a life cut tragically short. Today, the entire world seemed to hold its breath, bearing witness to a father's unbearable grief. As the procession moved slowly toward Section 60, the hallowed ground reserved for those who gave their last full measure of devotion, Ethan's steps faltered for the first time. The military band played softly, their somber notes filling the heavy gray sky as rows of soldiers stood at attention, rifles angled in solemn salute. Ethan's mind was a whirlwind of memories, deployments, firefights, late-night calls from Marcus sharing stories of survival and hope. But nothing prepared him for what was about to happen. Just moments before the casket was to be lowered, Ethan noticed a local police officer standing near the parked vehicles. Officer Brent Davidson, assigned as traffic detail for the event, seemed out of place, his mirrored sunglasses hiding his eyes and his hand twitching near his holstered weapon. Ethan's chest tightened, a silent warning in his gut. Without warning, Davidson strode up to Ethan, barking, "Sir, can I see some ID?" Ethan blinked, confused and startled. "I'm talking to you," the officer snapped, stepping closer, hand now fully on his gun. Ethan, in full-dress uniform, replied calmly, "I'm Colonel Ethan Reynolds, here for my son's funeral." The officer's face hardened. "Stop right there," Davidson ordered, suddenly drawing his weapon. The crowd gasped, children screamed, and Ethan froze, his hands instinctively rising. "I'm not armed," Ethan said steadily, voice barely trembling. "This is my dress uniform. You're making a mistake." But Davidson didn't lower his gun. Instead, he barked, "Drop to the ground. Now." Shock rippled through the crowd. Ethan had survived combat zones overseas, had led troops through the chaos of war, but nothing had prepared him for being held at gunpoint by an American cop at his own son's funeral. His mind raced, recalling years of military training on threat assessment and survival. But here, on American soil, in the place where Marcus was to be honored, Ethan was a target. Despite the fear, Ethan remained composed, his voice clear and firm. "I am unarmed. I am a United States Army colonel. You are pointing a weapon at a grieving father." "Costume or not, get on the ground," Davidson snapped. Adrian Foster stepped forward urgently. "Sir, that's Colonel Reynolds. You're making a grave mistake." Davidson swung his gun toward Adrian, sending shockwaves through the crowd. Soldiers and mourners alike held their breath, frozen by the surreal horror unfolding before them. Tears streamed down Grace's face as she whispered, "This can't be happening." Ethan's hands remained raised, his heart pounding, but his voice stayed calm. "I will slowly reach into my coat to show my military ID." Davidson's reply was cold and immediate. "If you reach, I shoot. Amid the growing tension, officers rushed in, and Lieutenant Serena Kim, who had been coordinating traffic nearby, arrived at the scene. Her sharp command, "Holster your weapon now!" broke through the standoff. When Davidson hesitated, Kim forced his arm upward, knocking the gun from his grip. He was restrained, but the damage was done. Ethan knelt on the ground, his grief and disbelief mingling in silence. The stunned silence at Arlington National Cemetery shattered as cameras and phones whipped out to capture the unbelievable scene unfolding before them. Ethan Reynolds, a battle-hardened Army colonel, knelt on the cold pavement with his hands pressed to his head, the weight of grief and shock making his body tremble. Just inches away, Officer Brent Davidson's loaded gun had been aimed at his chest, a moment no one there would ever forget. The crowd was a mix of soldiers, family members, and mourners from all backgrounds, their faces etched with disbelief and sorrow. No one could believe what had just happened at what was supposed to be a sacred moment of honor for a fallen hero. The funeral had ground to a halt, replaced by a harrowing confrontation that ripped through the heart of the ceremony. Within minutes, the footage of the standoff went viral. A teenager standing across the parking lot had filmed the entire ordeal on shaky cell phone video. The raw images spread like wildfire, Ethan kneeling calmly, Officer Davidson barking orders with gun drawn, and the tension hanging thick in the air. By lunchtime, the video had already amassed millions of views, sparking outrage nationwide. Meanwhile, inside the cemetery's privacy tent, Ethan was still struggling to process the shock. Sergeant Diane Nolan, a fellow veteran who had served with Ethan during deployments in Romania, helped him to his feet gently. "You're safe now," she reassured him, her voice steady but laced with anger. Ethan nodded slowly, feeling the crushing exhaustion of the moment. Outside, the Arlington Police Department scrambled to respond. Their initial statement was cold and clinical. "An incident involving one of our officers is under investigation. The officer is on administrative leave." No apology, no acknowledgement of the trauma inflicted upon a grieving father and decorated soldier. The statement only fueled the firestorm of public outrage. Prominent figures and veterans spoke out immediately. Senator Lyle Bowers tweeted, "A four-star general attending her son's funeral had a gun pulled on her. This is a disgrace to our nation." Retired General Teresa Randall appeared on CNN, her voice cracking as she defended Ethan's honor. "This is not just an incident. It is a betrayal of every soldier and family who has served." Protests formed quietly but firmly outside the Arlington Police Headquarters. Veterans, military families, and civilians of every race stood together, holding signs that read, "He served, he was threatened," and "Justice for Ethan Reynolds." The scene was peaceful but charged, a collective demand for accountability. Inside the Reynolds family home in Maryland, letters and support poured in from across the country. Among them was a heartfelt note from a Gold Star mother in Kansas. "I buried my son, too. I'm sorry the uniform didn't protect you as it should have." The weight of their support was a balm to Ethan's bruised spirit, but also a reminder of the deeper wounds in the system. In the days following the harrowing incident at Arlington, Ethan Reynolds found himself grappling with a flood of emotions: anger, betrayal, and an overwhelming sadness that threatened to consume him. Yet amidst the turmoil, a profound shift began to take root in his heart and mind. What had started as a personal tragedy was quickly becoming a catalyst for something much larger. A reckoning with the realities of systemic injustice and the painful truths about how society perceives those who serve, especially when race is involved. Ethan had spent decades in uniform, leading troops through some of the deadliest combat zones, earning the respect of his peers and the gratitude of his country. Yet, on what should have been a solemn day of mourning, he was reduced to a suspect, a threat, simply because of his skin and the uniform he wore. The officer's actions shattered Ethan's faith in the very institutions he had devoted his life to protecting. In the quiet moments with his sister Grace and longtime friend and fellow soldier Adrian Foster, Ethan shared his frustrations and fears. "They saw my uniform last," he said softly. "But first, they saw my skin. And that changed everything." Grace nodded, tears in her eyes. It's not just you, Ethan. It's a reflection of a system that's broken, a society that still judges us by color before character. The overwhelming support from the public, military families, and civil rights groups began to illuminate a path forward. Ethan realized that his pain could become a beacon for others, a powerful voice against injustice and discrimination that persist even within the ranks of those sworn to protect. He vowed not to let his son's death, nor this humiliating episode, be in vain. His private grief evolved into public advocacy. He began attending meetings with civil rights lawyers, speaking at closed-door sessions with military leaders, and quietly mentoring younger veterans who faced similar battles off the battlefield. The experience deepened his resolve to fight not only for justice in his own case, but for systemic reforms to prevent such abuses from recurring. Ethan's perspective had shifted from individual sorrow to collective responsibility. He understood that this was not just his story. It was America's story. A mirror held up to a nation still struggling with its demons, calling for courage, accountability, and change. And in that painful clarity, Ethan found new strength to carry on. In the weeks following the viral incident and mounting public outcry, Ethan Reynolds found himself thrust into an unexpected role, a reluctant but determined advocate for change. The weight of grief still pressed heavily on his chest, but he recognized that the spotlight on his story presented a rare chance to confront deep-rooted issues of systemic bias, law enforcement accountability, and the treatment of veterans. Through meetings with civil rights organizations and military advocacy groups, Ethan learned how widespread the problem was. Countless veterans, especially those of color, had faced undue suspicion and aggression even while wearing their uniforms. The story of his confrontation with Officer Brent Davidson became a rallying cry, highlighting the urgent need for reforms in police training and community relations. Ethan's voice resonated far beyond the military community. Invitations poured in for speaking engagements, from universities to congressional hearings. He met with lawmakers, sharing firsthand the trauma of being seen as a threat rather than a hero on the day he was supposed to say goodbye to his son. Each conversation chipped away at apathy, pushing officials to take tangible steps toward justice. The Department of Justice launched a formal investigation into the Arlington Police Department's handling of the incident and broader practices. Local government officials vowed to overhaul training protocols on racial profiling and use of force. Meanwhile, Ethan collaborated with organizations dedicated to supporting Gold Star families, leveraging his experience to advocate for better protections for those grieving losses in uniform. Back home, surrounded by family and friends like Grace and Adrian, Ethan began channeling his pain into purpose. He organized community forums to educate citizens about veterans' rights and police accountability. His message was clear and powerful. Respect and dignity are not privileges. They are rights owed to every person, especially those who have sacrificed for their country. Even as the courtroom battle loomed ahead, Ethan's newfound platform inspired others to speak out. Veterans shared their stories of discrimination. Families of fallen soldiers joined the call for justice. What had been a moment of personal anguish was now a movement demanding systemic change. Through this opportunity, Ethan found a renewed sense of hope, not just for himself, but for a future where no family would endure the same humiliation and pain. The fight was far from over, but the momentum was undeniable. And for Ethan Reynolds, that was enough to keep moving forward. As the legal proceedings unfolded, Ethan Reynolds transformed from a grieving father into a symbol of resilience and justice. The courtroom became a stage not only for the trial of Officer Brent Davidson, but for Ethan's powerful testimony. A testimony that revealed not just his personal pain, but the larger truth about systemic injustice. Ethan's years of military discipline had prepared him to face fear, chaos, and loss. But standing before the jury, he confronted a different kind of battle, one fought with words and truth. Calm and composed, he recounted the day of the funeral with vivid clarity. The sharp command of the officer, the cold barrel of the gun aimed at his chest, the disbelief of everyone present. His voice never wavered, carrying the weight of all he had endured. What happened that day was not just a mistake, Ethan told the court. It was a failure of judgment, of training, and of humanity. I am not here for revenge. I am here for accountability. No mother, no father, no soldier should ever have to kneel in fear at the funeral of their child. The courtroom was silent. Veterans, families, and civilians alike felt the raw power of Ethan's words. His strength inspired those who had once only sympathized to now stand in solidarity. He became a mentor to many, offering guidance to those struggling with their own battles, whether on the battlefield or in the systems meant to protect them. Ethan's growth was not just public, it was deeply personal. He learned to channel his grief into activism without letting it consume him. Supported by Grace, Adrian, and a close-knit legal team, he found balance between honoring Marcus's memory and fighting for a better future. Even outside the courtroom, Ethan's presence sparked change. His story prompted police departments to reevaluate training and engagement with minority communities. He met with young veterans, encouraging them to speak out against injustice and to use their voices as weapons for change. Through this journey, Ethan discovered a new sense of purpose. He was no longer defined solely by the loss he suffered, but by the hope he inspired. He carried Marcus's legacy forward, proving that strength is not absence of pain, but the courage to stand tall through it. The day the verdict was read, the courtroom was packed with a heavy silence that seemed to press on everyone's chest. After hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a unanimous decision. Officer Brent Davidson was found guilty on all charges: aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, civil rights violations, and abuse of authority. The judge's sentence was firm: life in federal prison without parole. There was no applause, only the weight of justice settling in the room. Ethan Reynolds stood tall, not in triumph but with quiet dignity. The fight wasn't about vengeance. It was about accountability, recognition, and change. Stepping out onto the courthouse steps, surrounded by media and supporters, Ethan finally broke his silence. His voice was steady, but beneath it was the raw emotion of a father who had endured unimaginable loss. "I didn't come here for revenge," he said, looking out at the sea of cameras. "I came here so no other soldier's family has to kneel in fear, so no one is judged by the color of their skin before their character. My son believed in this country, and I still believe in the promise it can keep." The crowd listened, captivated by the honesty and courage behind his words. He called out the system that had failed him, not just one officer, but a culture that enabled such injustice to persist. "This is America's mirror," Ethan said. "It's time we stop looking away." In the weeks that followed, Ethan's story continued to inspire movements across the nation. His advocacy helped push forward new legislation aimed at police reform and better protections for veterans and minority communities. He was invited to speak at conferences, universities, and legislative hearings, always reminding audiences that true strength is standing up in the face of pain and speaking truth to power. But beyond the headlines and speeches, Ethan found solace in the quiet moments. Visiting Marcus's grave early on a peaceful Monday morning, sitting with a single sunflower, Marcus's favorite flower. He didn't pretend to be healed, nor did he forget the day his world shattered. But he had learned what strength truly meant: moving forward, even when your heart feels shattered, and using your pain to light the way for others. The story of Ethan Reynolds is not just about loss and injustice. It's about courage, resilience, and the power to transform grief into hope. It reminds us all that even in the darkest moments, the human spirit can shine brightest. The story of Ethan Reynolds teaches us a powerful lesson about the importance of dignity, respect, and accountability. No matter a person's background, rank, or appearance, every human being deserves to be treated with compassion and fairness, especially those who have sacrificed everything for their country. The incident highlights the dangerous consequences when prejudice clouds judgment and when institutions fail to protect those who serve. More importantly, it reminds us that true strength lies not in silence or submission, but in the courage to speak out against injustice, even when it feels deeply personal and painful. Ethan's journey shows us that pain can be transformed into purpose, and that standing up for what is right can ignite change beyond the individual. In our own communities, we can honor Ethan's example by being vigilant witnesses and advocates for fairness. Speak up when you see someone treated unfairly or discriminated against. Support organizations working to reform law enforcement and protect veterans' rights. Encourage open dialogue about racial bias and systemic inequality. Most of all, remember that respect and empathy are the foundation of justice, and that every voice matters in creating a more equitable society.